Are you tired of the same old streaming options? Introducing Myco, the revolutionary Web3 content platform where you can not only watch films, TV shows, user-generated content, live events, and listen to podcasts, but earn from them too. Myco commissions and produces content that connects and empowers both viewers and creators in a fully decentralized video ecosystem. With live monetization, crowdfunding, NFT gating, and even the opportunity for fractional ownership of content, Myco is changing the game. Myco. Join the conversation and start earning today. Download the app from the Apple and Google Play app stores.
Telecast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to this week's Telecast. On this week's show, TV historian and founder of History Hit Dan Snow joins me, alongside Jake Humphrey, sports broadcaster and co-founder of award-winning TV production company Whisper. Peter White from Deadline joins us with the latest Hollywood TV industry news. And this week, K7 Media's content Confucius, Girts Licis, looks at a summer like no other. It's all coming up on this week's Telecast. So my first guest on this week's show is Dan Snow. Dan is familiar to millions of viewers as the UK's favourite TV historian, having presented many hours of broadcasting for the BBC, including 20th Century Battlefields, which he co-presented with his father Peter, The Dam Busters 70 Years On, D-Day, The Last Heroes, and 1066, A Year to Conquer England. Dan launched History Hit as a podcast in 2015, and the SVOD channel followed in late 2017. The podcast generates millions of listens a month, and the channel features a mix of original and licensed history content. And joining Dan is another of the UK's favourite broadcasters who's involved in the production of premium TV content, Jake Humphrey. Jake is currently the face of Premier League football on BT Sport, having been at the forefront of much of BBC sports coverage for many national and international events. After launching his broadcasting career on CBBC in 2001, he began presenting live championship football coverage on BBC's Match of the Day, before going on to join the BBC One and BBC Two anchor teams for the Delhi Commonwealth Games in 2010. In 2012, he broadcasted at the European Championships, hosted Summer Olympics coverage for BBC One and BBC Three, as well as anchoring the BBC's award-winning Formula One coverage. Jake joined BT Sport at the start of the 2013-14 season as the face of their Premier League coverage. In 2020, he launched the High Performance podcast. Jake is also one of the co-founders of award-winning production company Whisper. Welcome to Telecast, Dan and Jake.
Hello.
Thanks for having us on.
Dan, coming to you first, you're obviously a very familiar face mainly through the BBC's history programming. International TV industry execs might know you more through History Hit, which is essentially your podcast and obviously an SVOD channel as well. It's been a massive undertaking to launch your own SVOD. Can you tell us how that came about and bringing all those parts together and who's helped you and, who does what?
You'll all remember that kind of niche SVOD dawn about 3 years ago. Netflix, it's all so quick, isn't it? Because it seems so obvious now. But I mean, even 5 years ago, Netflix was not as embedded in our culture as it is now. And we had a podcast, we had a bit of a social media presence, we had a bit of a brand. We made apps. There was also that other false dawn, which was making factual apps for iOS and Android that people might actually pay for. And there was a brief, the periodic table, the planets, Brian Cox's planets. There's a few that did quite well. So we made some of those under the History Hit label. The podcast did quite well. So we just thought we'd give it a go on the SVOD. And I look back and the lightness with which the decision was made is pretty remarkable because it was a couple of years, pretty hard work. But we got Simple Stream organising the back end. We licensed a lot of content from various places, initially BBC Worldwide, so a lot of my back catalogue, other distributors as well. And we bolted it all together and we produced one of many niche SVODs that's popping up all over the place at the moment. We were very lucky because we had quite a big social media presence through my kind of legacy TV work. And then, let's say, this podcast, it was sort of slow growth. It's getting better and better. And then lockdown has actually been a boost for us, like it's been for all the SVOD platforms out there.
How much new content do you produce and acquire
every year, and how much is there in total on History Hit?
Well, so there's a few hundred hours on there now, and the really exciting thing. There are two technological revolutions that everyone knows that happened at the same time. One, white label SVOD platforms became available. So, you could start an SVOD platform without it being completely terrifying, right? You get it up and running. And we crowdfunded that, for example, to get initial money we needed to get the platform going. But the second revolution that obviously took place is the in production, which is you go out now if you wanted with an iPhone, but often with a small 4K, as everyone knows, extraordinary cameras. And I've got my Zaxcom sound on me all the time, so sadly we dispense with sound engineer, and so it's just me and a shooting director. You travel around the country on Boris bikes and if international lists on shared bikes, those city bikes, on subways, on jumping in the back of Ubers, which I'd imagine when I joined the industry, first job I ever flew to Egypt and had 8,000 UK pounds excess baggage. Right, we were flying out weights for the crane. Right, can you imagine? And then we were doing weird things like if we want drone shots, I just tweet local guys. I say, hey, I'm on this river, I'm on this ocean. If anyone wants to come do some drone shots, come along. And so it was fun. It was, but it was as everyone knows, it became super cheap. We took advantage of those two revolutions, and the upshot was we were able to make quite a lot of content. I devoted a lot of my time to it because we have found these people on the internet. I mean, there's a lot to do on the internet, right? But we managed to find these people that are going to pay us £5 a month. They get through it's not as slick a paywall as Netflix. I'll just say that, right? They fight their way through there. They give us their details. They're actually paying us in money. So you can assume these people are mad history fans, right? Insane history fans. So therefore, the content that we're making is fairly cheap because it's long interviews with great historians. And when I'm making shows for BBC or Channel 5 in the UK or Discovery in the US, each sequence is like 90 seconds and it's like a day's shoot. Endless material hits the floor. The beautiful interview with the Second World War veteran, we only use a minute of. Well, my interview with the Second World War veteran runs at 40 minutes. Little historian voice, veteran interview, bit of archive, bang, it's done. 4 or 5 grand. That performs really well for us. In fact, it performs as well as the licensed, established, content we're licensing in. It's the fact that they're super fans and they are prepared to watch a different kind of content that's been a game changer for us. And it does so. For example, when I'm doing a podcast, I'll just film the podcast, and then often we just marry two talking heads together, and we got a show. If we do a podcast on Queen Elizabeth I, and then we do one a few months later on Queen Elizabeth I, boom, we got 2 talking heads, we got a show. So that's kind of where it all germinated. That's how it came about.
Interestingly, what the pandemic has perhaps identified is the way to do production going forward, because we know that budgets are going to come down for a lot of broadcasters, particularly commercial broadcasters. So actually that way of being nimble and fleet of foot, everybody needs to learn perhaps more how to do that.
Well, I can feel my friends in production absolutely calling me a traitor as I say this. But just last week I was recording with October Films for Channel 5 about the Dam Busters. It was me and one director who was shooting and hadn't had time to recce. It felt like History Hit was 3 years out of the game. And I think the result will be pretty good because this director was fantastic. We're filming great stuff, talking to great people. Dam Busters, Lancaster Aircraft, great stuff. There's still money there for locations, and it feels to me like the money goes on screen. It felt really good, and we were making sure that we got the most out of all these locations, and there's no fat. It was a pretty high or low, whatever the expression is, shooting ratio. I mean, I think it's going to be not much that we've shot is not going to go on the television, and that's how we've operated at History Hit for years. So I think everyone's saying it, and it's what everyone says with previous pandemics. It just takes what's going on in society at the moment and just puts it on steroids and accelerates it by about 10 years. And so the kind of march towards whether it's Disney Plus, Netflix, or the way we produce stuff, I think it was all there. It was all happening. And now it's just been accelerated massively.
You talked about how History Hit has perhaps benefited from a subscriber perspective. Has the educational aspect of History Hit helped that as well? I mean, I noticed on the service you have 3 different year stages for kids to be able to access content, as well as obviously the general increase in SVOD subscribers. We
got on some weird viral list that people were WhatsApping to sort of parents, home teaching groups and stuff. And it said like Joe Wicks, who's the kind of is exercising everyone at 9, at 10 o'clock. Carol Vorderman, a famous mathematician here in the UK, a very famous TV presenter, is doing maths on her YouTube channel at 11 o'clock. And no one knows where this list came from. It was a kind of weirdly shared little list that went around. I mean, and my friends were getting it WhatsApp 10 times a day. And then it was like at 2 p.m., Dan Snow is going to do history. And it had and so we picked up thousands of subscribers in the space of about 3 days. We support teachers. There are lots of documentaries on there, but we don't have lesson plans. We don't have things like that because we've discovered that the education market is very difficult because obviously not just every country, but every region, a lot of regions, different countries have different syllabuses and different requirements. And if you're going to ask teachers and schools to spend money, they need to be geared towards getting exam grades. So we don't have, watch this, answer that question, this prepares you for this part of this exam. It was great, but it was also pretty scary because we also thought some of those mums and dads would open it up, have a look at it and go, actually, it's not quite what we thought, and churn off. With the exception of that big spike, we've just seen a kind of steady increase in subscribers. And one thing we have noticed is revenue yield on the podcast is a bit suppressed because that's all free and that is lodged with Acast. Listens are way up. We're killing it. Listens like almost 3 million listens a month now. The revenue has fallen a bit from what it was in January and February. So the COVID and then the recession is going to have different impacts, different parts of the business.
I'm sure we'll get to talk a little bit more about that later on in the show. Jake, coming to you, as well as being the face of BT Sports Premier League coverage, you're a founder in Whisper production company alongside David Coulthard and Sunil Patel. Can you give us a background to the company?
Yeah, of course. Back when I was working on the Formula One coverage for the BBC it would have been about 2010, early 2010. And I'd been working only for about a year and a half for BBC Sport. Before that, I'd done about 8 years on children's BBC. And I'd worked with amazing creative producers. And I'd worked with people who were wonderful at organising stuff. But I hadn't worked with too many people that would do brilliant organisation, amazing creative, and also just think really big picture stuff. So I started working with a producer called Sunil Patel, who to this day is the CEO at Whisper. And the first thing that I loved was how he just sort of seemed to have no barrier to what could be achieved. So if we spoke about an opening VT for something like the Bahrain Grand Prix, he would come up with an idea to have, I don't know, the Foo Fighters playing on a ship in the middle of the sea and Elon Musk lands a rocket on the boat halfway through and then Donald Trump gets off and says, "Welcome to the Bahrain Grand Prix." And he would imagine that is achievable. And often it might not be, but the fact that he believes it is was so exciting for me. And at that same time, we were surrounded by a lot of money because we were working in Formula One. And a lot of that money was being spent with agencies and with production companies who would come to us on Wednesday or a Thursday in the paddock in our TV compound where we were preparing the show for the Saturday and the Sunday. And they'd say, right, we've got amazing access to two of the drivers at a stunning location with incredible cars. Would you like the content? And of course, we were like, yeah, definitely. Because quite often the very best access was going to the sponsors and the partners of the team and things. And we would happily use that content on the BBC. Then it would get delivered to us, normally too late on a Friday, normally on a format that we couldn't use. When we were able to use it, it was often too plastered in advertising, or there was no story to it, or it didn't look great, or it didn't sound great, and it just didn't go anywhere. And it was so frustrating because we used to say to each other in the production office, man, if we had that budget, that time, and that access, imagine the content that we could create. So I started speaking to Sunil, and I just said, look, instead of being eternally frustrated by other people not doing great stuff, why don't we set something up ourselves? And so it was a big risk for him. He left his job working at the BBC as a staff producer. And my wife left her job working on Strictly Come Dancing as a production manager. And we had a production manager and a producer, and we had our back bedroom in our house in Richmond where we lived at the time in West London. And that would have been middle of 2010. And the very first contract we got was when we drove to the Williams Formula One team through our contacts with them through the BBC. And we said, look, we're not sure what you're paying at the moment for your yearly content budget, but we will do it cheaper and better. And what we sort of said to people was, the quality that we can offer you is what we've been making for the BBC. It's that good. And people seem to understand that. And that was the first contract we ever won, was the contract to produce content for the Williams F1 team. And I remember we left and we had no office, we had no company name, we had no plan. And we stopped in a lay-by and started dancing around like idiots because we couldn't believe what had happened. And then we sort of quickly stopped thinking, hold on, someone's going to emerge any minute and see these two blokes dancing around in a lay-by and withdraw the offer. And that was it. Whisper Films, we were called back then. We decided on that name as we drove home to London that evening. That was the day that the business was born. And here we are a decade later with 80 staff. Our headquarters are in Kew. We've got 5 or 6 labels underneath us now. Obviously, 25% owned by Sony. Previously, Channel 4 had 25% of the business. And it's just grown and grown.
It's not only Formula One programming, which I see recently been retained to produce the Formula One coverage for Channel 4, but you're also producing coverage for NFL, Paralympics, Sail GP, Women's Super League, cricket, and the W Series Women's Motorsport Series, amongst others. So what's fueled your growth? Obviously, huge growth in that in 10 years. I mean, what do you put that down to?
Yeah, I mean, we're now producing more highlights of sport on terrestrial television in the UK than any other production company. And I think the number one thing that has driven that growth, and this is really advice to anyone who's maybe listening to this and they're working in the industry and they'd love to go and set up their own production company, I would absolutely advise them to do it. But I would say that have as your absolute calling card investing in people. Because in my mind, every business is just a recruitment business. It doesn't matter whether you're working in television, running a carpet shop or running a football team. If you can just recruit the right people, you will 100% be successful. And that's really what we've done from day one. I remember we used to go in for meetings with people, and by this time we'd hired 4 or 5 people. So it might have been a team of about 6. And often we'd be told afterwards, the best ideas, the best dynamic, the best price, but you're a new company. We're just not sure we can take the risk and give you this multi-million-pound contract. It's a really big deal for us. And we just worked out that the best way around that really was to go out into the industry and instead of taking dividends every year and putting them in our back pocket, leaving the money in the business and just going and getting the very best people. So one of the early hires that we made was when we took Mark Cole from BBC Sport. He was head of football at the time at BBC Sport. And we brought him across to Whisper. He's now our MD. And then so many people were like, hold on, he's left the head of football for BBC Sport to come across and to join you guys. The key to investing in people and getting the right people is to make sure that you reward those people. And I get frustrated the number of times I speak to brilliant, dynamic, exciting producers that are creating content and winning business and driving companies forwards. And I'm like, how do they reward you for that? And they're like, how do you mean? I just get my salary? That to me is the weirdest thing in the world. We have to reward the amazing creatives that work in our industry. And if we can set up a production company that is massively successful and takes people on that journey with us, then that is the aim for me.
Do you have ambitions beyond sports programming?
Yeah, absolutely. Which about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, we started to think really carefully about this. And there's a couple of reasons why. The biggest reason is making sure that we generate IP. And Dan obviously will know all about the importance of IP generation. The big issue with just producing sports content for TV channels is that you get paid the money to do the work and that's it. It's done and dusted. And we very quickly realized that we need to generate IP. And so we started to invest. And instead of just hiring people, the other thing that we're really open to are creating joint ventures. We set up a company called East Media with a guy called Nathan, and he came in and he's got a brilliant track record of producing entertainment programming. So he came in with another person, so it was a team of 2, and we said, look, we will back you, we'll provide the office, we'll pay your wages, we'll do this straight down the line as a joint venture, and let's see if we can create some entertainment content. And then we hired just recently, actually, one of our biggest hires and one of our most important hires was Helen Warner, who was former head of daytime at ITV, head of daytime at Channel 4. Helen has come in with a remit really to work right across the business, not just to bring her skills and her knowledge from years in the industry at the very top, but also to drive the IP generation side of things. And we've just announced this week another joint venture with a company called Moonshine, which are 2 wonderful fact temp producers who've got a really amazing track record in comedy. So we're trying to do joint ventures with businesses that complement each other, and they all sit under the Whisper umbrella, but they're very much independent. And that's one of the exciting challenges for us, is to bring people in to help them and to lift them up and to push them forwards, but at the same time making sure that they retain their sort of originality and that they can operate in a way that they want to do. And it's a kind of a partnership without us being fully in charge in the sense of we don't decide exactly what they do and how they do it. We very much let them be a part of the family, but feel independent at the same time. And then we have a graphic design agency as well in-house, because we produce an amazing amount of graphics for all of the contracts that we do. And it was important for us to keep some of that in-house. Yeah.
So the pandemic has obviously affected everybody in some way or another, particularly when it comes to broadcasting industry. Sometimes, we spoke to Dan, we've also spoke to other SVOD platforms over the last few weeks, and they've obviously seen a huge spike in terms of subscribers. On the production side, that's a little bit more difficult, I would imagine, in terms of how companies have negotiated it, particularly with sport, right? Because there's been no sport as well. So from your perspective, how have you navigated the last 3-4 months?
With complete honesty to the staff about how difficult a position it was that we were put in. It's on record that overnight we lost, or tens of millions of pounds worth of contracts were put on hold overnight, because really, I remember I was on air actually in my role as presenter at BT Sport. We were doing a Europa League game, and we heard the news that Mikel Arteta, the Arsenal manager, had COVID-19, and there was a player at Chelsea that had it. And that was the weekend that then we knew the Premier League would stop, and pretty much every other sport followed suit. So we lost W Series, which is now operating esports only. Sail GP moved to next year. WSL the same. The Paralympics, we were producing the Paralympics for Channel 4 this summer. That's now obviously moved to 2021. And it was a really difficult time for the business. But the number one thing for us was to make sure that we protected our staff and our business, so that at the end of this pandemic, we and they all had a business that was ready to go. And I have to give huge credit to Sunil, our CEO, because I think at times like this is when you really find out what someone is actually like. And Sunil, to his great credit, has taken no salary since the day that the shutdown happened back in March, and he'll continue not to take any salary until the business is fully up and running. Our partnership with Sony was really important because they have a fantastic mental health scheme, and they gave us full access to that, and our staff were contacted extremely regularly to make sure that their mental health and their well-being was looked after. And then I put aside a pot of my own personal money, and I just sent a private message to every member of staff saying it's not just if you're struggling financially, it's whether any member of your family has lost their job or you've got an issue, just pick up the phone and let's have a chat, and we'll sort you out. So from the well-being side, that was really important for us to get right. And then I think it was a case of how can our business come out of this period stronger. We already had a few things in the pipeline. So we've just done a documentary for BBC Two called Inside Monaco, which has become the most watched factual entertainment show on BBC Two for the last 6 years. And I guess some of those viewing figures were driven by the numbers because of the pandemic and everyone staying at home. But that was a big moment for us where people watched something that Whisper is not known for and thought, wow, these guys have done that. They've produced that. It can be so frustrating in our industry sometimes that people aren't geared up to make a really brave decision and to take the risk. And I think that's helped people see Whisper as less of a risk in the non-sport space. And then I think it was about us making brave decisions as well. So we contacted Channel 4 and we agreed with them to co-fund a documentary on a sort of fundamental part of Black British life, which is probably largely unknown in the white community, which is called The Talk, which is the talk that if you're a Black family, you have to have with your young child about the fact that life's going to be harder just because of the colour of your skin. And the key for us was to co-fund that with Channel 4. We wanted to sort of use our platform and our position to raise the awareness, to help generate change. And we're a company with a BAME CEO. We're a company that actively tries to invest in people underrepresented in our industry, whether it's having women in really key high-powered roles within the business, whether it's supporting people from the LGBTQ plus community, whether it's making sure that we actively look to recruit people with disabilities to work on something like the Paralympics and to be part of the Whisper team going forwards. It's really important to us that we look after those people as well, and we don't just say the right things on social media, which I think we see a lot, but our actions speak loudly.
That's obviously a fantastic, approach to take. And I think over the next few months, we're really going to see a whole lot of changes when it comes to talent being available, coming out of businesses, coming out of perhaps production companies and broadcasters, and to a lesser extent, distribution companies. There is going to be a huge talent pool that's going to be available out there. So hopefully there are still going to be those opportunities for them to be able to grasp and maybe set up their new businesses or maybe set up joint ventures going forward.
Yeah. And if there are people listening to this that like the idea of a joint venture and have a great idea and want to pick up the phone, just, please get in touch.
So, Jake, coming to your story of the week,
yeah,
Banijay has made TV industry headlines over the past week or so, and you've chosen their takeover of Endemol Shine as your story of the week.
Yeah,
talk us through that.
I've chosen that because for me it represents something that I'm a big fan of, which is really big thinking. Banijay is only a couple of years older than Whisper. They've only been around since 2008. And I love the fact that they are a company that have set targets, gone out and attained them, and gone really big as well. To go and acquire the Endemol Shine Group is the sort of thing that most people would look at and go, yeah, that's a big target, possibly not realistic. Yet they went out and they made it happen. And a really big bit of learning for us was the time that we spent as part of the amazing Channel 4 Growth Fund, which absolutely transformed our business from primarily producing commercial content to being where we are now. And I think we've learned a lot from that and almost want to kind of recreate that within our own business. So I love the idea of giving a chance to loads of small production companies and individuals who could do great things, which I think is how I would have described Whisper. We needed someone to give us a leg up. And I now like the idea of doing that. And the best way to do it is joint ventures and partnerships. That is the success story that Banijay are. They are people that want to work with others. And I think that it's something that we can all learn from in the industry.
Do you think it's positive for the industry to have such a huge, well, it's not even a super indie. It's such a huge
super indie.
Yeah, I mean, it's we were saying last week, 85,000 hours of content. Some of the biggest entertainment brands in the world there. Presumably, there's going to be some sort of consolidation within their business. And I mean, do you think that's a positive for the industry?
I think it's a positive as long as Banijay do it right. As long as they, I guess, take the approach that we've taken at Whisper, where you still allow the individual production companies to flourish, because there will be some really big success stories that come out of this. And they will be the companies that are part of the Banijay group, but still are allowed to operate with their original beliefs and their original ethos. And it is a real challenge to have a huge business, but still allow originality and allow individual personalities to shine. And I think it can be a great thing for the industry, because I think sometimes it can be so difficult to run a small independent production company that we need some Banajays out there who have got the ability to lift others up, but it has to be done in the right way. It's not good for the industry if the consolidation is too great and they all become part of the same mold and the same group in respect of no individuality. And I guess there is also a risk that broadcasters and commissioners will look at Banijay as a safer bet for a commission because of their size and their scale and their ability to back the projects that they're commissioning. So I think the other thing is that commissioners and channels have to really be aware that we have to share the love around in the industry to make sure that everyone gets looked after. But I firmly believe if your ideas are good enough and your approach is good enough, you will be okay.
I just want to chime in. The final thing I think we try and encourage at History Hit is we got a really, really flat commissioning structure and executing structure. So we just find individuals, directors who've got great ideas and then we think have got the track record, and then we just support them to make a film. So we can't afford re-edits. We can't afford the time of paying senior execs to go back and nitpick over scripts. And so I think it's allowing that creativity because it's cheaper for us. And I think the results are better. I do think if we're not careful, you can get a little bit too many layers of management in our industry because it's creative. That's the problem. I mean, if you show me a film, I watch it, I got suggestions. That's what happens. It's not like making a, sprocket for a car. I just go, oh, well, I'd have put the beginning at the middle. And then you ask someone else, they say something different. So we've got a kind of policy that we actually have to shut ourselves up when these films come in.
Coming to your story of the week, this is about Hamilton, surprisingly enough, Disney Plus's musical movie.
I mean, when I was a kid, obviously as a sort of privileged white teenager in the 1990s, I was obsessed with hip hop, clearly. And I was also obsessed with 18th century history. I always assumed that those two passions, the Venn diagram, would never meet. And then some insane genius that we're just privileged to be alive at the same time as him. Lin-Manuel Miranda goes and creates Hamilton, in which he tells the story of late 18th century American and to a certain extent world politics and history through the medium of hip hop. So, I mean, I've been to see it dozens of times, and I'm one of the few people that gets all the jokes about federalizing the state debt. And as for the rap battle between Jefferson and Hamilton, where they're discussing whether or not to support the French in their war against the British, I mean, that's it. There will never be a piece of content that has been created that I respond to better than that. But so Hamilton moved the dial on Disney Plus. I always like to say, one of History Hit's fellow SVOD channels, Disney Plus. When it obviously premiered on a week ago, the Disney Plus app was downloaded 74%. 75% higher than the previous average, the previous 4 weekends. And worldwide, it was about half as high, so 50%. So it's fascinating that even the monsters like Disney, still content is king. I somehow just assume that Disney is like a giant sort of super tanker. It doesn't really sort of almost matter, but it does. You can move the dial. And Hamilton finding that extraordinary content, producing it brilliantly and getting it up can make a significant difference.
And they brought that forward by a year, apparently, in terms of the film. They brought that forward on their schedule. And some other stats, the app itself, Disney Plus app, was downloaded 750,000 times globally. And this is over and above, obviously, their nearly 55 million subscribers that they have generated in, 6 months? Just over 6 months. So it's an extraordinary story. And as you say, content is still king in the sense that, it felt like event programming.
Everyone said, well, the thing everyone will miss is event programming, right? Water cooler moments. And what's been so profound about Netflix in particular during this lockdown, another History Hit competitor, they're doing all right as well. Look back at the beginning of lockdown. You remember that Tiger King? Everyone talking about Tiger King. It's like it is. When they drop, or there was recently a Jeffrey Epstein drop as well on Netflix. Like those streaming services can create cultural moments. There is absolutely no question, and this Hamilton's probably the biggest example of that yet.
And are you considering any event programming type shows for History Hit? I mean, obviously we're going through the biggest change in our history in you can tell us how many years as the historian, but are you looking to sort of depict the current pandemic in any way?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I love being agile. I mean, I like trying to sit in that space between news and history as much as possible. I tried to at the BBC and never really got much traction there. But programs about pandemics during the pandemic, I think, are really important. So we've commissioned a Black History of Britain with a young Black historian that's in the edit at the moment. We commissioned that within days of the start of this latest phase of the Black Lives Matter, the awareness of that all over the world. We've done dozens of podcasts on pandemics. They actually perform best of all the podcasts we've ever done. People are absolutely fascinated because they've also got practical information. I mean, you've got a historian of virology on there. And he's like, he was talking about masks. Professor John Oxford was talking about masks, distance apart, safe space. He was talking about that in February, March when I had him on the podcast. So again, the great thing is the agility. I look at the BBC and they're announcing this giant amount of new money for this, that, and the other. And you're like, so obviously I'm different league, but we've actually created and delivered hours of content already with different voices, different subjects, highlight, we had Keisha Blaine on, who's a professor in US history about the forgotten women, the Black women of the civil rights movement. Yes, that's gone out. That went out ages ago. So I know the other thing we got, of course, is anniversaries. Our audience love anniversaries. So we're working with the Mayflower sort of body that organises the Mayflower, sort of the 400 years since the Mayflower left these shores, went to North America. So we're working with them. We're going to be doing live streams. We're going to be doing long form. We're going to be doing podcasts. So yeah, I mean, anniversaries is a big thing where we try and create moments as well.
So we've come to the time in the show where it's time for you to nominate your hero of the week and who you're going to be telling to get in the bin. Jake, who's your hero of the week?
Yeah, my hero of the week is Dragonfly, a production company who had an NHS documentary on at the start of the week on Monday evening. And what captured me about that, and I spoke earlier about how impressed I am with people that think big and think ambitious. Dragonfly had about 3 weeks during a global pandemic, by the way, to get into NHS hospitals and set up all their equipment, to do it socially distanced, to do it safely, to do it without risking anyone's lives. And then obviously had to get all the footage, edit it, and end up transmitting it at the start of the week. And I think to do that in the current climate, it's so much easier just to say, oh, listen, at the moment it's so hard to operate. Let's just shut the doors and wait till this is all over. But for them to capture what will in time, and I'm sure Dan would agree with this, in time become some of the most important footage that's ever been seen, which is our country dealing with a global pandemic for the first time in over a century, was remarkable.
And that was a brand new 3x60 series for Channel 4. And they had 3 days for pre-production and 3 weeks to shoot, and obviously everything being remotely edited as well. I would really recommend everybody goes onto the broadcast website, and there's actually a behind the scenes article on there that's really worth reading. All right, Jake, that's Dragonfly and their Frontline NHS production as your hero of the week. Dan, how about you? Who's your hero of the week?
My hero of the week is Rebecca Nagle. She is a journalist in Oklahoma. She's a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And she, I don't know if you've, I'm like lots of weirdos, just totally obsessed with American politics at the moment, as it just goes from sort of extraordinary seismic car crash from one to the next. And she was doing a podcast about this really important Supreme Court case that was being heard about the land ownership rights of the Cherokee Nation within Oklahoma. And the Supreme Court, perhaps surprisingly, voted overwhelmingly to uphold the rights of the Cherokee. It's just stunning because often the American government historically hasn't lived up to its treaty commitments to indigenous peoples. Again, it's a great example of digital, of podcasts, of this new media environment we're in. She had this fantastic podcast out there, and it just gave me a lot of insight into what is a sort of historic ruling by the Supreme Court. I think it's a fantastic bit of journalism, fantastic bit of storytelling.
I suppose we may be conditioned to expect that sort of decision would go against.
Traditionally, historically they have done, exactly.
Yeah, and that is over 3 million acres in Oklahoma has been that reservation. So that's brilliant news. So Rebecca Nagle, podcaster, is your hero of the week. Jake, who are you telling to get in the bin?
Well, I haven't gone for a person. I've gone for the permanently loaded, negative, aggressive headlines that I'm seeing more and more of all the time with just horrible undertones. And I was reading an article last week that said we seem to be spending so much time now worrying about what we put in our bodies, making sure that we eat the right things at the right times. How often do we really make sure that what we put in our brains matches up with that? And it's not something you really think about. And then when you do, you think, hold on a minute, how bad is it or actually for me to be absorbing this kind of content? And I think the problem is a lot of the time we don't even realize the fact that there is an aggressive, sneering undertone to the things that we're reading. And I've just had enough of it. I just think that we need to live in a world where we all do our best to lift people up. Pretty much everyone is doing their best, right? In really difficult circumstances, particularly at the moment. And I just think it's time we all altered our mindset to be one of positivity and one of embracing and celebrating other people rather than trying to do people down. I'm just pissed off with people doing others down to make themselves feel good. I've absolutely had enough of it. Maybe it's because I spend too much time on Twitter, which can be such a difficult place, but I'm just done with it. I've had enough.
Who knows? Maybe that overall more positive, kinder, informative type of journalism will come to the fore again. But I think you're absolutely right. Dan, how about you? Who are you chucking in the bin?
It's easy for historians to chuck the sort of history community to chuck David Starkey in the bin at the moment, but it was pretty extraordinary what happened a week ago with that whole flare up, and I got a little bit drawn into it because we had a David Starkey documentary on my channel, and we took it down and people criticised us, and then I had this. It really helped me think about the whole issue around freedom of speech and platforming and everything, because I completely support his freedom of speech. History here is mine, it's my channel. If I had a magazine, I wouldn't put him in it saying those things, and so I took him down, and it was kind of interesting, quite empowering moment. I've never had to do that before, so that was fascinating, and it just was deeply disappointing. So lots of people, a lot of the sort of anger and emotion around that event was just assuming that that's what sort of the history community were like behind closed doors, and so it felt really, really a retrograde, regressive step, and it was just embarrassing for any. Now as a middle-aged white guy who does history, I just was, it was sort of shameful. So, but I'm glad in my own little way we're able to make a little statement about that. But that was just so disappointing.
Yeah, well, good for you. I mean, I won't repeat what the quotes are. Anybody can Google those. But it was, you're right. It was shameful and great decision, Dan. I think everybody could certainly applaud you for that, guys. thank you so much for taking the time to come on Telecast this week. It's been the first time that we've had some broadcasting talent on the show, and a producer and a owner of an SVOD channel. So, really delighted that you've taken the time to come on the show. It's been really exciting for me to have you both on. So thanks for your time, and hopefully see you down the road very soon.
Thanks so much for having us on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justin. And it's been a pleasure to share it with you, Dan. I've watched from afar. I'm a history obsessive. Never, obviously, produced any history programming myself.
Thanks, man.
So it's that time once again to go over to LA and visit Peter White from Deadline Hollywood. Peter, how you doing? How are you holding up over there? You well?
I'm good, Justin. Yeah, another day in paradise. Although lockdown, still here.
Same as many of us in terms of your lockdown situation. So wish you all the best with all of that. In terms of TV news this week, Peacock is about to launch. We'd almost forgotten about Peacock, or certainly I had. Bring us up to speed with that. Where are we? What's Peacock all about for everybody that's been focusing on Disney Plus or all the other SVODs? Tell us about Peacock.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them, so it's no surprise that some of them slip slightly under the radar. Peacock launched yesterday in the States. They had a bit of a beta test with some cable subscribers for the last few months, but nationwide it launched on Wednesday. And it is essentially NBC Universal's version of Disney Plus and HBO Max and all the rest. So yeah, they did this big rollout strategy. They are in a similar situation to a number of the other streamers in that a lot of their big shows that they had hoped to launch for it were hit by the coronavirus. They, had things like Saved by the Bell and Punky Brewster reboots that never quite made it. Their big title at launch is an adaptation of Brave New World, a futuristic drama. So that's their big title. So that I think they were pleased. On one hand, they could at least get one big show to launch with. I think we spoke to Bill McGoldrick, who's essentially the president of content there. He, admitted that they wish they'd had a bit more, but they've also got this big library. And that's the thing with a lot of these services. This is a huge library of, thousands of hours. So it's got things like 30 Rock, Cheers, Parks and Rec. And it will have The Office coming in January 2021, which is their big bet. Obviously, it's still a big hit on Netflix. So they're hoping that will entice some subscribers. And then they're doing the same thing that a lot of other people are doing. They've got a lot of originals down the pipe. They've got a new show from Tina Fey called Girls 5 Ever, about a girl band. They've got a new Mike Shaw show called Rutherford Falls. They've got a Jada Pinkett Smith show called Straight Talk. And they have a reboot of Battlestar Galactica, written by a Brit, a guy called Mike Leslie, who many people will know from Little Drummer Girl. He was the showrunner of that, the BBC AMC co-production. So that's their big thing. I think for NBC, what they're hoping is that the thing that they will differentiate is they'll have a free tier in addition to the paid tier. So you can pay and get all of the shows. You can pay and get all of the originals, but you can still watch the AVOD model with a lot of titles. So I think that's their big bet. They're appealing to advertisers, which a lot in this space haven't. The likes of Netflix and Apple. So they're hoping that will help them, and whether they can get some numbers on that. The other thing is they're leaning quite heavily into Sky, because obviously NBC Universal is owned by Comcast, which also owns Sky. So a lot of the shows that have been airing on Sky and will air on Sky, things like Intelligence, the David Schwimmer comedy, that's coming to Peacock. Hitmen, which has Mel and Sue from the Bake Off, will launch on there. And they've got other things like Code 404. And then they also have a few things that are distributed by NBC Universal. So things like The Capture, which was that BBC One drama, which was produced by Working Title and the NBCU production studios in London. So they're leaning heavily into their sort of corporate synergy, as you like. So I think they're hoping that will be quite helpful. And then, like everyone else, they're trying to figure out when to get their shows back into production and what else they can have coming up. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We'll see. I guess I'm sure, like all of the other streamers, they won't actually tell us how many people are watching, but we'll soon get a sense of if there's any buzz or not. If it's the next Netflix or if it's the next Quibi.
Interestingly, so just going back to the different levels of subscription. So there's a completely free level, which, once advertising starts to come back into the market, which presumably it is starting to happen, there are about 13,000 hours of that you can watch entirely free content, as long as you're prepared to sit through the ads, which presumably in America you are, right? I mean,
yeah, we've. It's interesting. We've got a Hulu subscription here, and in the apartment I'm staying in, and it's got the advertising tier. So I've watched a Popeyes advert probably 15 times a day for the past 3 months. It hasn't made me want Popeye's chicken anymore. But the advertising, as you say, in the States is people are used to it, certainly more used to it than in the UK. So I think that's why they think the AVOD might be a bit of a direct differentiator, that people are sort of used to ads, especially in a market where lots of people are losing their jobs and having to cut their costs. Having a free tier is not something to sniff at.
Absolutely. And we're seeing, obviously, the other AVOD players that we've spoken to over the last few weeks. We know Tubi are obviously launched, and Pluto TV, for example, as well. The AVOD model seems now, in the light of lots of redundancies across UK, US, and lots of other Western nations, that presumably free is a very enticing price.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, we'll see over the next few months. We'll see if the advertisers come to it. We'll see who's watching it, see how many people subscribing to the other tiers. I'm sure, given their Comcast ownership, we'll find out a little bit of that detail over the next 3 to 6 months.
The next level is more content, isn't it? If you pay, you have access to additional content with ads. And then finally, the top level of $9.99 is all the content and none of the ads.
Yeah, and that free tier gives you a little taste of some of the originals, so things like Brave New World and Battlestar Galactica. So you can watch what they're saying is sample episodes. So I think they're hoping that if you really like one of those, then you'll pay to watch more. But that's ultimately as to whether these shows are any good or not. So I think that will be interesting to see whether those originals drive that subscription, or if people just want to watch The Office and 30 Rock and don't mind a few adverts.
Yeah. Well, it'll be also interesting, obviously, with Quibi. We saw the numbers on Quibi in terms of the very small reported numbers of subscribers that actually retained the service after their 90-day free trial. I think it was about 8 or 9% from the figures that we looked at. So it looks like there's a whole load of consumers out there who are looking for new content options, and maybe this one is arriving right at the right time for them.
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing about Quibi is there's a bit of a disconnect between Hollywood and the rest of the country in terms of Quibi. And there's been a lot of articles written about how it hasn't quite worked. And, I totally get that. And the numbers absolutely don't show them in a good light. But we've been speaking to quite a few of the creators over the last few months and the people who are, making these shows for them. And they really like the experiment. So I think, as long as they don't lose that creative community, it'll only take a show or two to pop that people might change their mind about Quibi. I'm not saying that they'll get suddenly millions of new subscribers, but they're still buying shows, and they've still got the support of much of that community, or so it seems.
All right. Well, we'll keep our eye on that. And the next story is about a new appointment in Hollywood.
Absolutely. Well, look, international producers, their best hope of getting a show on in the States is usually non-scripted, particularly on the network. So the fact that CBS has got a new head of non-scripted should be interesting. I know a lot of the Brits will want to know that. CBS is obviously the channel that does the remake of Love Island, that does Undercover Boss. Jack Sussman, a man who has been at CBS for 22 years, is taking over from Sharon Vong, who left a couple of months ago to join NBC. He comes out of the specials, music and live events department. So they've had a bit of a shake-up there. They've combined those departments and they've rejigged that. So he's going to be in charge of that. There's his lieutenant is a man called Mitch Graham, who will still have some oversight in terms of those shows. But it's not quite clear how many of the international production community know Jack. It's, his sort of focus was on those big ticket things like the Survivor live finale. But the music and live events department sort of gives an indication of perhaps where they see this. These big shows. They obviously do Survivor, Amazing Race, and Big Brother. I think CBS is in that world where they're not going to do hundreds of reality shows a year, but the ones they do, they want to be big, and especially over the summer period, they want something like that. So it'll be interesting to see what Jack is tasked with, how many of those shows he's going to be developing, and so forth. So I think he'll be an interesting hire, certainly for the US producers and even more globally.
Absolutely. So maybe there's, it's about live event spectacles that he may be looking at, big ticket events.
Absolutely. And I don't think CBS is going to be the only one, but I think if you can get a reality show that they get some live numbers, then you've got a winner on your hands, because that's what they really want to appeal to advertisers and to get those ratings numbers. So I think, live is still a big thing. Lots of the other networks are telling us that's event programming. It's not new, but it's still popular at the networks.
Yeah. And I guess once we all can come together and go to events and experience events, there's going to be this huge pent-up demand, surely, for biggest ever Glastonbury, the biggest ever live whatever kind of show, right? There's going to be like the cork coming out the top of a bottle, presumably.
Yeah, absolutely. Rolling around in the mud next year sounds more fun than ever, doesn't it?
Fantastic. Well, Peter, thank you once again for joining us this week, episode 13. So brilliant to have you with us every week. Look forward to catching up with you next week.
Thanks, Justin.
So once again, it's the time of the show to say hello to everybody's favourite international content clairvoyant, K7 Media's Girts Licis. Sveiki, Girts.
Sveiki, hello, Justin. How are you?
Very well. I'm trying out my Latvian here. I'll be.
It's perfect. It's almost perfect.
Excellent.
Already.
Almost.
Yeah.
I know the almost.
I'm proud of you.
Well, I've got to try. A little bit by bit. Maybe by the end of this section, I might find out what thank you and goodbye is. I might surprise you. Let's have a go. Let's see if we can do it.
Okay.
So it's summertime.
Yes, and I think it's a very different summer this year, isn't it? Don't you think?
Certainly is. It's like no summer we've ever experienced before.
Totally. But as always, it's never just black and white. There is always a silver lining. And what we see this summer, at least in some markets, is a considerably higher number of premieres than usual on the linear channels, which are rushing to compensate the gaps left by cancelled sports and other live events like music festivals that traditionally fill the summer schedules. And I think Denmark is a very interesting example in this respect. The Nordics in general are known for being, let's say, inflexible when it comes to working in summer. The summer holiday time there is almost like sacred to a great extent due to the traditionally short Nordic summers, which need to be enjoyed while they last. And sometimes it can be a nightmare to even reach the Scandies on business matters in July and up to mid-August, as they are all leaving on lengthy vacations to their summer houses, usually close to some water, at least the lake, if not the sea. And in many companies, even in normal times, they are allowed to work remotely for another couple of weeks before returning to their offices in late August. But this summer seems to be very different there, as there is unusually high production activity trying to catch up after the lockdown. And like I said, the schedules are boosted with numerous new launches. So if we look closer at the two main broadcasters in Denmark, DR and TV2, for instance, they both have an extensive focus on music this summer. And while the Danish music festivals have been cancelled because of COVID-19 this year, both channels have produced alternative substitutions. TV2 is airing 4-episode series, Hele Danmarks Festival, Denmark's music festivals, in which the host goes to 4 iconic festival spots, bringing along some of the musicians who should have performed in them, and they just make an improvised mini festival spot. This TV program is very, very popular, with more than a third of Danish TV viewers watching it. And DR, as a public channel, has taken a more traditional approach, perhaps, launching live shows where some of the Danish artists from the cancelled festivals are invited to perform. And these shows offer a wide range of genres, from jazz to heavy metal and folk, and dive into the different cultures around that music. The other big part of programming is focusing on spending summer in Denmark in many different ways, and those prove to be tremendously popular. For example, the Summer Vacation House special of the location format is reaching 40% viewing share, More than 34% of viewers are switching on the hit reality series The Farm, in which 14 contestants spend 10 weeks competing for a money prize while working on an all-season farm, as well as their friendships. Similar viewing numbers are reached by another local show, which could be called Whack and Munch in English, in which a chef and a hunter are making dishes from what they kill and gather from nature. And then there are several series on there currently involving such an iconic Danish pastime activity as sailing. One of them is a series called Sailing the Danish Coast in English, which follows a local television celebrity and his family as they sail along the Danish coastline and meet the Danes and experience the sights of Denmark along the way. And I have to note that this current series is a tweak to a hugely popular program in which this same family have been sailing the world usually. And then there is another show, Sail and Sing, which has premiered with great ratings as well, and which basically sounds like a sailing version of the James Corden's Carpool Karaoke, as it has a host sailing around Denmark in an iconic wooden ship, and in every episode, 3 musical stars board the ship and sail along for 2 days, and along the way they perform some of the songs that are most important to them.
Is that kind of like slow TV? Or is that so maybe the first Whack and Munch maybe is slow TV?
I think it's a bit faster than slow TV.
Okay.
But it's still a good summary relaxation Nordic style. But I guess we can see probably similar trends in other countries, particularly around the local traveling this summer, as many international travel destinations currently remain unavailable. So broadcasters increasingly are finding these new creative ways to promote local travel. And in addition to giving the viewers an opportunity to travel, at least virtually, these shows often fulfill the social function as they try to boost the hard local economies. I can just mention perhaps another 2 typical examples from the other part of the world, from Korea, from South Korea, illustrating this broader trend. There is a reality talk show, Travel at Home, on SBS, which is an adaptation of MTV's format, where celebrities reveal their favorite memories of Korean travel destinations and recommend them to their fans. And meanwhile, on another channel in TVN, reality show On Wheels, the hosts have actually built a small portable house that enables them to experience life in various places around the country. They move it around to different local destinations, live there together, and invite guests over for fun activities and heartfelt conversations.
And sports is also coming back, at least in part, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it is. And its loyal audiences are eager to welcome it back. From UK's Premier League to Formula One racing, which has proven itself very popular on Germany's RTL, returning with a 28% viewing share there, now probably giving some headache to the channel's execs, as it's the last time this Formula One series aired on RTL, with Sky having secured exclusive rights from 2021. And on that note, next week can bring some tectonic changes in sports broadcasting in a longer term, as the sports streamer DAZN, which was rapidly growing pre-pandemic, is going to start its international expansion from the current 9 to over 200 territories. Though it's going to be more like a beta launch, it's sure going to make some waves with a boxing match between Virgil Ortiz Jr. and Samuel Vargas. The choice for such an important rollout may raise some questions, like why not something mainstream like a football match? But while combat sports generally have smaller fan bases, those tend to be more willing to pay in order to access them than football fans, for instance. DAZN have announced they aim to become the world's first truly global sports broadcaster. And while this plan sounds very, very ambitious, despite the current economic uncertainty, it might be the right time, as they can try to follow the success of Disney Plus in a way, using the current circumstances in their favor to secure exposure and monetization.
Yeah, well, I think everybody's been looking to create the Netflix of sports, haven't they? In some way, it's almost like the holy grail. And certainly the ways that we're going to be watching and enjoying sports are going to be changing.
It's already happening. And I think it will be also interesting to see how it's going to affect the gameplay itself. Like in football, for instance, without the fans cheering them on, teams appear to lack the home advantage that often proves decisive in helping sides to beat stronger opposition. Also, the fans have noted that there has been an unusually high number of so-called wonder strikes, with players perhaps more at liberty to attempt unlikely shots from long range, knowing that they won't be subject to jeers from the stands if they miss the target. And when it comes to broadcasting, most notably the Premier League as well as the German Bundesliga have returned with enhanced sound, which has reportedly gone down very well with viewers. Basically, the enhanced sound means crowd sounds such as ambient sound, cheering, booing, etc., which get added from archived games, bringing in atmosphere, authenticity, and excitement. And viewers can opt out using red button services, but there appears to be a consensus that surreal experience of hearing crowd that cannot be seen is preferable. Though some pundits have commented on the rare pleasure of hearing the shouts of the players motivating each other and the commands of captains attempting to direct play, as well as the opportunity to actually hear the ball being kicked.
Well, it's certainly interesting to see the way that TV production is changing in terms of the way that it's covering sport, to make up for the fact that there's no live atmosphere, there's no crowds there. I certainly would prefer the low hum when I'm watching the cricket. It's much better than just, hearing traffic on the street next door or something. It certainly adds a little bit to the atmosphere, but it's certainly no comparison to having a real crowd in there. But it'd be interesting to see, what new developments come in and what get taken on for when we all get back to normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think next week we'll probably look at other angle and other genres in the same respect, right?
Absolutely. Sounds good. And I'm going to see if we can get DAZN to come on the show. I'd love to hear from those guys to hear what their plans on. So watch this space.
Yeah.
Thank you. And to you, Girts, I'm going to say Paldies un us redzasanos.
Perfect.
Really? Okay.
See you next week.
All right. Thank you, Girts. We'll see you next week.
Take
Enjoy
care.
the summer.
Thank you. You too.
Well, that's about it for another week's show. Thanks as always for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to the show and share it with friends and colleagues. And you can follow Telecast now on LinkedIn. If you want to hear about our advertising and sponsorship packages, please email justin@boomdialogue.com. That's justin@boomdialogue.com. Telecast was edited by Ian Chambers. We'll see you again next week. And as ever, stay safe. Are you tired of the same old streaming options? Introducing Myco, the revolutionary Web3 content platform where you can not only watch films, TV shows, user-generated content, live events, and listen to podcasts, but earn from them too. Myco commissions and produces content that connects and empowers both viewers and creators in a fully decentralized video ecosystem. With live monetization, crowdfunding, NFT gating, and even the opportunity for fractional ownership of content, Myco is changing the game. Myco. Join the conversation and start earning today. Download the app from the Apple and Google Play app stores.